Hello, good day and welcome once again to the Tobago House of Assemblies Division of Education, Innovation and Energy's e-learning program. I am Kimarie Richardson Thomas and I'm your presenter as we continue to look at our CSEC English A. And today we're going to explore components of our multiple choice paper, specifically looking at the section 2. And this is a lesson that's been presented to you, it's been prepared for you by Nefertiti Mior of Mason Hall Secondary School in Tobago. So let's go into our lesson today. We have one main objective, and it is that at the end of this session, you will be able to respond to multiple choice items typically found in section 2 of paper 1. Now that section 2 really comprises of our comprehension type of items. And we're going to look specifically at items that can be along our narrative line. So stories and poems. Read the following passage carefully and then select your answer on the basis of what is stated or implied. You're going to be advised, I'm advising you to take a picture of each slide as we go through to tell our story, because we want to make sure that you can see the passage very clearly, but we have to divide it into sections. So get your smart devices out and take a picture as we go through our passage. News of Sukdeo's death depressed Tiger, and for some days he did no reading or writing. There had been something about the old man, a hidden pride, a secret knowledge, and Tiger had never known him to worry until these last weeks. He felt he understood Sukdeo more than anybody else, that he had sympathized while others scorned and laughed, that he had been, in a way, a companion, someone to talk to share secrets with. Don't mind he didn't tell me about the money he buried under the mango tree. A friend with whom to drink, and above all that, it was Sukdeo who had inspired and helped him to read. He went to the hut and saw the old man, stiff, his eyes and mouth open. His wife and daughter wept copiously. In life, he was to be scorned and argued with every minute of the day. In death, he was to be mourned. The good he did, remembered. A stream of villagers flowed gently into the hut with sympathetic remarks. Poor Sukdeo dead. He was a good man. Don't mind he drank plenty rum, he's still a good man. They stood about, flowing into the corners, and they murmured to Sukdeo's wife that if she wanted any help, they were there to give it. But she said the government people would bury him, that they wouldn't have no trouble. Oh God, oh, but what I gonna do, Sukdeo corn, what I gonna do? It's only me and Dolly here now. Tiger thought about death. He was young and strong and could afford to shrug at it. But how about when he got old as Sukdeo, gnarled and bent, wizened and sunburnt? What about Umela and the children when he died? Sukdeo had buried some money, and the compensation would keep his family for a while. There were always jobs to do in the village. They would have to plan for the future. What was he going to do with all the money he would make working for the Americans? He would go away and study. No. He would stay and build house. Nah, man. Buy plenty land, have a big garden. Nah. Send the children to Port of Spain to get big education, come doctor and lawyer. Open up a shop and make more money. Send Umela and the children back to Shogunas and go away for a long time. So we just have a little part that's missing below there. But we have the essential parts of our story. And what we want to be able to do is look at what are some of the questions that you can get for a comprehension type of setting if we're using narrative writing. So we have here, item number 1. Tiger's reaction to Sukdeo's death shows that. Now here, it says Tiger's reaction. Tiger's reaction to Sukdeo's death. Let's make sure it's We're looking here at a reaction. What it is, it shows about, what it tells us about how Tiger felt about Sukdeo's death. A says Tiger was sympathetic towards Sukdeo. B, Sukdeo had never been a favorite in the village. C, Tiger would miss Sukdeo's inspiration and friendship. And D, Tiger never thought Sukdeo would die so early. Now, while all of these may have elements of truth, what you're looking for is specifically what was Tiger's reaction. How did Tiger feel? We know that Tiger was sympathetic. We know that. B has nothing to do with Tiger's feelings. D says Tiger never thought Sukdeo would die. It's an impression, but it's not about feelings. However, C says Tiger would miss Sukdeo's inspiration and friendship. So if you've selected C as your answer, you are correct. And we're going through these, and I want you to select your answers as we go along, and I'm going to verify those answers with you. Number 2 says, which of the following exemplifies the use of irony? A says, villagers came into the huts with sympathetic remarks. B, in life, he was scorned and argued with every minute of the day. In death, he was to be mourned. The good he did, remembered. C, don't mind, he did drink plenty rum. He's still a good man. And D, but she said the government would bury him, that they wouldn't have no trouble. Select your answer. And if you have selected B, you are correct. This is an exemplification, or it exemplifies irony, because we have in life, he was scorned and argued with. He was not well liked in life, but in death, he was to be mourned. And they focused on the good. Item number 3. The expression wept copiously most nearly means what? And this again, this is a vocabulary type of question. You need to know what copiously means, and it's a word that has to do with a large amount of, large number of. It has to do with quantity. A says wept without stopping, B hardly wept, C cried loudly, and D wept abundantly. Now we know that there was a lot of weeping, so we can eliminate B. And then once we understand what copious means and how it's used as an adverb here, we're able to conclude that our answer has to do with the abundance of weeping. It meant that they wept abundantly. So if you selected D as your answer, that is correct. Let's move on. Sukdeo's death set Tiger off in a world of fantasy, mainly because, and we have here where Tiger started to fantasize about what it is he could do. A says he was afraid of the uncertainty of his own future. B, he was making plans for his wife and children. C, he was afraid of his own death. Or D, Tiger was highly imaginative. And when we go back, and I want you to look at your passage, what it is we saw, Tiger began to think about the frailty of his own life. He was not sure about the future, and he recognized that Sukdeo died. And because Sukdeo at least buried some money, his family had some degree of certainty for their future. And he was afraid of the uncertainty of his own future. Yes, he was making plans for his wife and children. He was afraid of his own death, and he was imaginative. But he was afraid of the uncertainty of his own future. And that's this, because of this, or rather because of all of these, we have this. Number 5. The use of direct speech in the passage serves mainly to do what? A, show the author's respect for the direct speech. B, appeal to the reader. C, indicate that people use both standard English and the dialect. And D, show that the characters are real and they inhabit a real world. When you're writing stories, teachers always encourage you to use dialogue because dialogue enhances your story. So that when you get a question like this, we know that it has nothing to do with the writer being showing any respect for direct speech. But we know that direct speech can appeal to the reader, and it can tell us that these characters are using both standard English and the dialect. But what it specifically does when you actually write your story and when you read it, it shows that the characters are real and they inhabit a real world. It immerses you into the lives of your characters. And I want you to always remember that when you're being asked questions about dialogue and direct speech. Let's take a look at the next question. 6. The style of this passage is mainly what? And if you've been tuning in to the e-learning program, we would have gone through previous lessons looking at different types of writing. And we explored what expository writing is. Expository writing aims at informing. We use narrative when we want to tell a story, descriptive if you want to explain a process, and reflective when you want to recount or express deep personal emotion. The style of this passage was a storytelling style, which is indicative of narrating. It's the narrative style. We want to look at 2 more questions that you can have for this type of passage in section 2 for your multiple choice. The passage does all of the following except. This is a structured type of question that asks for you to eliminate. You've already interacted with what the passage is giving you. Now they're asking you, what is the passage not giving you? The passage does all of the following except A, show the various reactions to Sukdeo's death. B, show the relationship between Tiger and Sukdeo. C, show the negative effects of Sukdeo's character. And D, show Tiger's imaginative qualities. Now, we did see various reactions to Sukdeo's death. You saw how Tiger felt. We got how his wife felt. We heard from the neighbors. We had various reactions. Even with the offer from the government to bury him, we had different reactions to Sukdeo's death. We got information that showed the relationship between Tiger and Sukdeo. Sukdeo taught Tiger to read. They were close. They confided in each other. Did it show the negative effects of Sukdeo's character? We heard that Sukdeo used to drink and he would argue a lot. But is it that we got a lot of detail about negative side of his character? Did we see Tiger's imaginative quality? This was very clear. What was not very clear to us was that throughout this passage, there was not this continuous show of the negative side of Sukdeo's character. So our answer here is C. As we move along, 8 says, Sukdeo and Tiger shared a close relationship mainly because A, they were friends for a long time. B, they were intelligent and educated. C, they understood each other and helped to fulfill each other's needs. And D, other members of the village did not befriend them. We know that they were friends, but not necessarily for a very, very long time. We know that Tiger could not read, and it was Sukdeo who taught him to read. So it's not that they were intelligent and educated. It's not saying that Sukdeo was not, but this is referring to both of them. And we knew that Tiger had not learned to read until his interaction with Sukdeo. They understood each other and helped to fulfill each other's needs. And we saw a type of symbiotic relationship between Sukdeo and Tiger. They supported each other, they encouraged each other, and they helped each other out. So we're looking here at C, but we know here that other members of the village did not befriend them. That was not articulated, it was not expressed in the passage. So it's not D. Our answer here is C. So we looked at what can happen within a story. What about when we get to those poems? Yes, we want to look at poetry and how you can analyze the poems before you actually get into answering the questions. So let's look at poetry. Now, at the end of this section that we're looking at here with the poems, you should be able to clearly define what is a poem, examine the structure of poetry, discuss imagery, discuss figurative language, analyze a poem using the SMILE strategy, and respond to multiple choice items based on a poem. So what is a poetry? What is poetry? Poetry is a noun that speaks of a piece of writing that partakes of the nature of both speech and song, and that is usually rhythmical and metaphorical. Poems are written to be read. Now, the challenge that you are going to have, we say that poems are written to be read in the exam setting. You cannot read aloud. They will put you out. But poems have been primarily written to be read aloud. They're part of our oral tradition. But you have to understand how to read quietly and still get the meaning, get the full impact of a poem through silent reading. A verbal composition designed to convey experiences, ideas, or emotions in a vivid and imaginative way. This is something that's key about poems. They're very vivid, very imaginative, and they're characterized by the use of language chosen for its sound and suggestive power. The structure of a poem is that poems are organized into stanzas, whereas stories and other types of prose writing are structured using paragraphs. Songs are structured using verses. Poems are structured using stanzas. A stanza is a clearly defined part of a poem, usually 2 or more lines, and characterized by a common pattern of meter, rhyme, and line numbers. And these are elements of poetic subdivisions and poetic structure. Each of these sections here represents a different stanza. This is one stanza here, 2, and this is a 3rd stanza. Some lines of a poem end with a full stop. Not all do. These are called end stop lines. So where you see the full stop in the poem, you have an end stop line. Some phrases may continue on to the next line, and these are known as enjambments. Now, you have to be very careful when you look at the poem, because poems don't follow the conventional punctuation that we speak about for prose. The words in a poem are arranged to create a particular rhythm. It's arranged so that you get a particular rhythm. The rhythm is the beat of the poem, the way it sounds when it is read aloud. Now, it takes very skilled readers to be able to maintain that rhythm through silent reading. And it takes practice, which is why it's very important for you to be engaged in as much practice and interaction with different genres of writing as you prepare for your exam. Take some time to go through the poems. Read them aloud so that you have a greater level of comfort by the time you have to be reading them silently. So practice to read them aloud, practice to read them silently, and begin to integrate yourself into the structure and style of poetry. Poets carefully arrange words to slow the poem down, and this is important. They arrange words to slow the poem down or speed it up. So you can have phrases that are difficult to say that would help slow the poem down. So for example, caught in a loop of sighing saltless waters. And by using the language like this, it slows down the pace of the poem to create the image of someone being stuck in a loop. Another element of poetry that many of us are familiar with and prefer to find in some of our poems would be rhyme. Many poems also use rhyme to enhance their rhythm. to attract attention and make their poem easy to remember. The way that rhymes within a poem are organized is known as the rhyme scheme. Rhyme is the repetition of the final vowel and consonant sound in the word or in words. So, for example, if we look at this example here from Dr. Seuss, and we have the cat in the hat. Today you are you, that is truer than true. There is no one alive who is youer than you. And if you're familiar with the Dr. Seuss cat in the hat types of poems, you know that it may not always make sense until you take your time and go through it. But we're looking specifically at the rhyme. You, true. There is no one more alive who is youer than you. And this is the last line here. So what we actually have is you, true, alive, you. So the more that you read, the more things you will know. The more that you learn, the more places you'll go. And this again here, we have a rhyme scheme. Know and go. Because of our punctuation, we know where to pause so that we get our rhyming that shows up the final vowel and consonant sounds in the word. Imagery, and this is an important element when we talk about poetry. Imagery is used to express the thoughts and feelings of the poets. This is when the language in a poem is purposefully selected to conjure up an idea in the reader's mind. I like to think of imagery as the mental paintbrush. The same way an artist would use actual paint and a brush to create an image, imagery would be those vocabulary, those words that paint the image in your mind. So see imagery as the mental paintbrush. This is achieved by using figurative language and sensory imagery. And sensory imagery speaks about those words and phrases that appeal to the five senses. Our figurative language includes, and you've done this before, so this is a recap, 3 of the main figurative devices that we come across regularly would be our similes, metaphors, and personification. These aren't the only ones, but these are 3 of the main ones. Others that we can find ourselves encountering in our poems can be assonance, alliteration, hyperbole, and onomatopoeia. So if we look at it, there are a range of other language techniques which are popular in poetry. Our assonance is the deliberate repetition of vowel sounds. For example, there's the exaggerated O sound in this one. The poetry is old, ancient, goes back far. It is among the oldest of living things. So old it is that no man knows how and why the first poems came. So we have the exaggeration of poetry is old and ancient and goes back far. It is among the oldest of living things. So old it is that no man knows how and why the first poems came. And you have that exaggerated, they keep repeating that vowel sound. We have the alliteration, which is, I like to call as alliteration and assonance the brother and sister devices. It is the deliberate repetition of the consonant sound. When Willy Wonka walked, and we associate alliteration as well with tongue twisters. The hyperbole, some people pronounce it hyperbole, is the deliberate exaggeration for effect. Deliberate exaggeration. We talk about it rained cats and dogs to indicate how heavily it rained. Or I ran faster than the speed of light. No one can actually do that. But it's a device used, an exaggeration that is used for emphasis. Then we have our onomatopoeia, words that are spelled the same way that they are sound. These are our sound words, our crash, bang, clink, swish. The actual spelling of the word tells us how it sounds. And last but not least, we want to talk about tone. The tone this is the overall feeling or mood of the poem, and it's created by a combination of rhythm, rhyme, and language features. So we get our tone through rhythm, rhyme, and language features. It's not isolated to one element. It is the attitude behind the words, and let's pay attention to that. The attitude behind the words. Think of a mother yelling, "Don't you use that tone of voice with me," to a cheeky or sarcastic child. And what tone will the mother use? It's not going to be, "Don't you use that tone of voice with me." The child is being rude and cheeky and sarcastic. What tone of voice is the mother going to use? "Don't you use that tone of voice with me." And again, too, depending on how old the child is. But if it's a Caribbean mother, it may not make a difference. So we talk here now about using smile to analyze poetry. This poem, when we talk about using a poem, using smile, if we are analyzing a poem, what smile stands for is structure, meaning, imagery, language, and the effect on the reader. When we look at a poem, we have to pay attention to all of these elements, because these are key to helping us understand what the poem means. Not every poem is very clear in its meaning, because poems are not always very literal. They are deeper, they have deeper levels of meaning. So when we go through, look at the structure, look at the meanings of the words. What about elements of imagery? What kind of language do we have in this poem, and how does it affect you, the reader? So let's take a look. We're going to explore a poem, and we want to really do this so that when you encounter poems in the exam, and even while you're revising and preparing for the exam, you know how to approach the poems to prepare yourselves. So we're going to look at a poem called Island Man by Grace Nichols. An Island Man was for a Caribbean island man in London who still wakes up to the sound of the sea. And it's very good to have some background about our poets. If you go through your CSEC English A syllabus, to the back of the syllabus, there's a section that lists suggested reading. These are stories and poems that you can read, and it's a very good idea within the next few weeks leading up to your exams. And even for those of you who are listening who may not be doing exams this year, go through that list. Take time to read some of the suggested material, because that is what CXC would pull from, what they would use as some of their resources for your exam. So get some background on your poets. So Grace Nichols is a Guyanese poet. She was born in Georgetown, Guyana in 1950. After working in Guyana as a teacher and journalist, she immigrated to the United Kingdom in 1977. Much of her poetry is characterized by Caribbean rhythms and culture, and influenced by Guyanese and Amerindian folklore.